Just a bit of a heads up, this is a very just messy intro to everything, just getting you right on the ground floor and as much as it can back in roughly in a junk drawer. Hi, hello, and welcome to the world of Warhammer Fantasy. Or the Old World. Or the world of the Old World? That naming scheme change is just a mess. Alongside its lore, so where to begin with it? Now, the Old World, or Warhammer Fantasy, is, well, the fantasy game cousin of Warhammer 40k, or the grandfather. And no, not that kind of magic or fantasy setting. It's a bit grounded. You know, you still have pike and shot. There's not just gods walking around willy-nilly. There's some demigods here and there, but outside of that, they're rare and scant. Unless you're the elves, then they're just a dime a dozen. But while you might have some high fantasy, basically magic Atlantis with elves on one corner of the Warhammer world, an empire ruled over by dragons, you then also just have someone dying in a gutter in the middle of a corrupt empire, where the wizards that are just basically used as weapons get burnt out and consumed by demons from the inside when a spell goes wrong. It's my type of fantasy. But it's not just those gutters and those bits of high magic here and there and all sides of them just hitting each other again and again. There's also the grand existential threat of the big old chaos gates, portals to the hells essentially, just straight up open on both poles, always threatening to send their cultists and demons to open them wider and wider until they consume the world. A real 5 minutes till midnight setting. Everything is the end times. In fact, the end times have roamed around 13 times? Sadly, with the 13th. A tragedy in more ways than just the setting, a tragedy in those books. Not written like a tragedy, they're just bad. Pushing that to the side, especially with the return of the Old World, we have a good renewed vitality to the setting, and also Total War Warhammer, which is what got me into it. But enough about just the general gist of it and its relation to the rest of Games Workshop, we have the beginning. So a long time ago, in a solar system maybe somewhere far away, you have a planet going through a rough ice age or on one of the colder belts of the solar system. It still has an equatorial band that seems to be roughly habitable, but the big thing is that dragons who care not for the heat are just dominant. Dragon ogres, giants, titans, all variants on all that. Some magic here and there tied to the world itself and a bit more acclimated, allowing dragons to fly around. And on this planet that just would have kept spinning around this same star over and over again, we have massive silver ships flying from the middle of nowhere. Carrying these creatures of magic, other reality, and the material world called the Old Ones. And also carrying around as luggage these weird frogmen called Slann. So the Old Ones come in with their Slann and ships, and they decide, you know what? This planet, in fact the whole solar system's not in the right place. Let's just push it way closer. Causing a lot of those dragons that were happy with the way of things to not be that happy with massive changes to the planet. Just terraforming everything, shifting the entire planet, and the entire solar system around it. Well, still around the star, but, you know, changed as well. All within this fine pattern that they follow like clockwork. Then the Old Ones place the polar gates, these massive, essentially stargates connecting to hell, or passing by it, heading into that other world which allows magic to come in and flood the world. Now, there was already magic, this is a different kind of magic. Or at least just more of it. Another thing a lot of the inhabitants of the world weren't happy about. But don't worry about that, the Old Ones had a solution for all the things that already lived there. Killing them all. So with their Slann building up different temple cities, creating these massive lizard men to be able to go out and just wipe the slate clean, and to enforce whatever the rest of their plan was. You have the little worker bees, you have the giant killer superhumans that are just, well, T-Rex on legs. Normal human legs, you know what I mean. And then the fridge that moves all the bricks around, with the Slann looking over them and a few more generations made to look over the world. Crazy powerful with magic. And as the world itself was shaping the way they wanted it, they made just a magical Atlantis with elves, and the first elves alongside that Atlantis. Made to be magically potent, extremes of emotion, and that was a fault. A really big fault, actually, when it comes down the line. So they decided to course correct and make something a bit less emotionally unstable and magically unstable, so they made the dwarves out of the stone. However, they were a little too resistant to magic and a little too locked into their ways that they wouldn't develop without some kind of direct intervention. So stuck in tradition and grudges that they just won't move forward. Thirdly, they made humans. A nice in-between here and there, and the big thing, able to adapt and change, which also dooms them. There's a reason the majority of, like, the cultist enemy factions are human, but can mess a little bit of magic, can be emotionally unstable enough to be able to do things and change, and physically adaptable to go to different environments, so they're kind of everywhere. Few other species made here and there, lizardmen sweeping everything up and bumping into some tag-along from the ships. Our greenskins, orcs, goblins, squigs, hobgoblins, not. The squig list and the variety just kind of goes on forever if you want to get hyper-specific. But more an infestation, they just kind of crop up and can never be stomped out by the lizardmen. Or at least not stomped out until, well, you know, we love a big C in the fantasy settings, the Cataclysm. So everything's going well. Whatever the plan is, whatever these different species were meant to do, they're just developing and moving on. Ancient civilizations, studying into magic, great artifacts and technology, some of those ancient creatures still kicking around in some different parts of the world. And then everything goes to hell. Particularly hell, actually. as both the polar gates go boom, one of them being thrown up into space and into orbit, being this horrific mass of bad magic rocks, warpstone, and then the rest of it raining down and corrupting both poles and just opening actual gates to hell. Magic that was already coming in vast quantities is now even more so, just warping entire realities around the gates. Humans corrupted, mutated, turned into beastmen, variety of different creatures formed for the first time, and legions of demons. Battles between the spirits and gods that already existed and the things from further beyond wanting to damn the world. All of this goes on for 1,000 years, getting steadily worse over time, until the High Elves kick in and create what's called the Vortex. Big ol' continuous ritual that's still technically going on at the same moment it started. The people initially part of the ritual frozen in relative time at the center of it, where all the magic from the world is taken, sucked up through waystones, brought back to Ulthuan, and shot up into space. Just actually shot up into space. It's not being banished somewhere else, it's just into space. You can't make physical contact with anything. This doesn't get rid of all magic, but is significantly less magic than what it was before the Cataclysm. Enough so that most of the demons just kind of vanish. And those gates on the massive North Pole shrink heavily, leaving a warped wasteland in between where they once were. And then another few thousand years happen. You have the War of the Beard, elves and dwarves hating each other, there's that explanation, civil war between elves, there's that explanation for Dark Elves, High Elves. Lizard Men got their butt kicked, being the front line of everything, so they're just kind of stuck away and hidden away on a continent, keeping old rituals going. And rising up from the ruins of all these great past ancient civilizations are humans, in more ways than just the empire building. Now, before heading into some more specific detail about some factions here or there, at least the heavy hitters, we're going to be talking a little bit about magic. So I briefly mentioned spirits, gods here and there, there's blessed or divine, but then there's actual mages bending the winds of magic. Now, magic itself is a bit more of an amorphous thing, or when you're initially casting it, but you can focus into one of 8 types it filters into the world with. Fire, light, shadow, beast, life, metal, heavens. I think I got them all. You can hyper-focus into these different specialties, and they're generally the main battle lores, but everyone else can just still interact with magic the normal way. As in, you just kind of pick and choose here and there, you mix some of them, but if you mix them poorly, you end up creating Dar. And with enough Dar, it solidifies into Warpstone. Dar being this horrific massive magic that is naturally corruptive. Similar to what happened during the Cataclysm, Dar being everywhere in the North Pole in the south. Same thing with Warpstone, the solidified version of it, which is highly powerful but highly dangerous. Mutations, madness, just general death from it, but greatly magically potent. There's then also High Magic, which is a subcategory of a perfect balance between all of them, but the lores can just keep going on. Those are your big ones: Dark Magic, High Magic, and the 8 in between. Now, factions. We have a long list to get through here. And first and foremost, for the great God King Sigmar, we have the Empire. Essentially the main character of the setting, if anything of their books are to be concerned. But an 80s British person's warped sense of what Germany was during the Renaissance. Throw in a bit of magic, some religious fanaticism, cults everywhere, and of course, good old God King Sigmar. Uniting the tribes and being just super badass to the point of reaching divinity at some point. Supposedly the only mortals to reach that state, but allowing some kind of grand religious institution tied deeply into the empire. You have a variety of different provinces in between, but in general it's rough Renaissance, industrializing in some cities, and some it's just backwoods. But you've got it all. You've got black powder, corrupt nobles, dangerous and untrusted magic, but still used, and all of it sticking together to being just mostly humans handling all the horrific horrors of this setting. While most of the other factions of the setting have something to give them a leg up against the other horrors of this world or each other, when it comes to the Empire, yes, it has some mages here and there, namely its large colleges in Altdorf, but the things that hold the Empire together are faith, steel, and gunpowder. And probably some Sabaton album going on in the background. Cause that is just a man you're giving a spear going against a giant, or demons from hell, fighting elves way faster, older, and better trained than him, or dwarves that are willing to tick it through anything. Not to mention greenskins and other monstrosities willing to just tear you apart without a second thought, or actively seeking it and wanting you gone. Just wiped off the face of this world. That is the Empire, standing that ground. Faith, steel, and gunpowder. Next up, we have our first truly fantasy faction, the French. So Bretonnia, it's a mix of French language here and there thrown into it, but it's all heavily medieval. The reason they can get away with just having knights and codes of honor and chivalry is the fact that they have the Lady of the Lake. Entire religion formed around it, again, similar to the God King Sigmar, holding all of Bretonnia together. And actually blessing those knights that you can have a cannonball fire into cavalry charges and just have them unfazed, bouncing off of armor, phasing through it with fog. And also still employing magic from the damsels. But sure, you have these super-powered, essentially paladin knights everywhere, the nobility having some grand standing supported by the Lady of the Lake and their legends. Then you've got the peasantry. We're hitting real Monty Python levels of just, it's bad. Because sure, you still have areas where it's not great in the Empire or other parts of the world, but hey, at least you're not a Bretonnian peasant dragged out into the front line against these things. Now, north of the Empire, we have Kislev. They hold the line of the frozen north against the horrors from beyond. When all those bands of Chaos Warriors and tribes and demonic armies want to march on south, they have to get through Kislev first to get to the Empire. The Empire says and boasts about how their faith steel and gunpowder holding everything together, fighting off the terrors of this world. Kislev's the one on its doorstep. Then you throw in ice witches, a bear goddess, and one of their famous czars wrestled a bear. Just a polar bear, Tsar Boris, and he entirely restarted the cult of Ursin. But no, led by an ice queen, ice witches in the court, a religion separate from that of the Empire, holding on to the front line, and the bloody ice. The true guardians of the North. Jumping over to the far side of the world, away from the old world, and everything going on there, you have Cathay, where we had like this section of Europe, roughly this section of Europe, France, a rough China equivalent, or just East Asia. In Cathay, the great bastion to the north, a truly massive wall, just keeping the Northmen out, and large gates set up after it cracked. Looked over by the Dragon Emperor and the Moon Empress and their children, or what's left of them. Shape-shifting dragons with great magical prowess looking over and bickering and fighting over different parts of Cathay. Fighting over at the worst of times, at the best of times actually defending. Now, Cathay has a really heavy policy against any kind of corruption, namely they ban a lot of use of magic, or specific kinds of mages, and when it comes to any kind of inkling of rebellion, potentially some kind of dissonance, or a little bit of chaos corruption here or there, that is stomped out violently and quickly. But technically one of the other human nations that has a big faction portfolio so far. Next up in the Trail of Order, we have the High Elves. Now, the elves a long time ago were all just the elves, and it didn't happen until the Sundering and the War of the Beard that began to split into different types. Not through some kind of like physical, biological difference, they're just all the same physical elf. It's more just how they operate and their beliefs. Generally, when it came to the Sundering, bit of a civil war and arguing which side of the pantheon to worship and follow. The High Elves, for all they say, they're pretty self-righteous, hence the high part. Quite the tall horse they're looking down from. But experts at magic, the defenders of Ulthuan and keepers of the Vortex, waking dragons from their ancient kingdoms, hiding in the mountains of this realm, and generally just kicking ass. The Wood Elves, now when the dwarves and elves had their bit of a civil war, an ancient deal and pact made with some tree spirits, some of the elves had to stay behind within Athaloran and other parts of the woodlands. The elves changing and adapting into something truly distant from their relatives. Hiding in the woods, bloodthirsty, really not trusting any kind of outsider, and definitely leaning more into like the dark side of Fae stuff. But hey, also you got treemen in this, and dryads, but not that kind of like, I mean they can be that, but when you're on the battlefield, they're mostly gonna be like that. Dwarves, stuck in their ways, up in the mountain holds, not really being able to use magic to get around it with runes, which take a long time to master and hammer into things. But to make up for the needed specialization of runes and how difficult it is to get multiple runesmiths, you have gunpowder. And other bits of engineering, they have helicopters. Cannons, organ guns, massive catapults with runes and goblins tied to them, and staunchly keeping to their oaths. So much so that if they break them, they have to take this oath to basically become a slayer, going out to try and kill as many enemies as possible before they die themselves. Also adding a sick orange mohawk and no shirt, apparently. Oh, and how could I forget the Great Book of Grudges? You might have seen that meme floating around here and there, but man, they hold on to a grudge just as much as they hold on to traditions and oaths. They will make sure a grudge is paid for. Whether it takes some kind of, few months to prepare an army to try and force you to pay up in gold, or generations later to kill your entire town. They are very stubborn. Now lastly, on the rough order sorting, the Lizard Men! They're still around, namely kicking around in Lustria or other parts of their temple cities, also in the Southlands, Dragon Isles, and elsewhere. Most of the Slann and the general idea of what the Old Ones wanted kind of just died out and disappeared when the gates collapsed. But the Old Ones did leave them with something. Golden plaques spread everywhere that had some kind of prophecy and great plan of what they were supposed to do. However, no one can really interpret it, even amongst the Lizard Men. The last of the first generation Slann actually brought in on the ships, now just a mummy that's used to nuke things. Still kicking around because Lord Croak does that, just doesn't die. But attempting to fill out these plaques, these prophecies, these rituals, and this great plan, trying to uphold what the Old Ones wanted. They're really strange, but I mean, South American secreted away temples and dinosaurs, mixing the two into a faction, it's just mwah. Now next up in the rough ordering of things, we have what's labeled destruction, loosely. And who to better represent destruction than the Greenskins? A catch-all term because they're green, mostly. But orcs, goblins, hobgoblins, you heard the list from earlier. And squigs, that one kind of stands here. Not really a trope monstrosity that you see usually, just it's a mouth meatball, murder mouth meatball. But if you know 40k orcs, a lot of that also transfers over here. But instead of, so much goof, so much knowing what's going on there, a lot more just into the killing, the violence, Wah, messing into this Wah energy, or Wah magic, which isn't quite the psychic thing that it is in 40k, but also isn't quite magic, but also kind of is, because magic can interact with it. In any case though, it allows you to make a giant foot to stomp on someone, alongside other things. You've got your orcs, scrap metal here and there, goblins backstabbing, hiding in tunnels, getting high off shrooms to go and hit you, wolf riders, spider riders, a crazy spider cult of goblins, worshipping Gork and Mork, the two gods, one brutal and cunning, cunning and brutal, and just generally killing things, just breaking things, just going on a wah. There's also the Black Orcs, which actually take this thing seriously, accidentally made by a group called the Chaos Dwarves. That didn't go well for them. But alongside their general rampages, they gather some monsters here or there, most of which they bully, like wyverns, trolls, giants. But your greenskins, your orcs and goblins. And heading onto the big, boisterous monster route, ogres, the ogre kingdoms. On top of just being big, they eat. They eat a lot, and they don't stop eating. Long time ago, originally starting roughly in Cathay, the Dragon Emperor wasn't liking that they were cramping on his style and his empire, kind of just, eating his citizens. And so, got his celestial chorus together, brought in a meteor that turned out to be a little too big and a little too eldritch monstrosity. Instead being in a huge warpstone meteor with a big mouth. Smacking into the world, killing most of the ogres at the time, and forever cursing their descendants with the maw. A large, it's just a mouth in the ground that just goes through the world, and forever has the ogres hungering. This weird religion made up around appeasing the maw, feasting. They have an entire school of magic called gut magic, focused all around eating weird things alongside the incantation. One of them's just eating a rock. But similar to the greenskins, bullying, hunting beasts, being stuck in the frost and snow, and the starved ogres being something entirely different. Nothing's better than food and coin. Preferably food, in that order actually, just food first. Coin just to buy food. Next we have the Dark Elves. You kinda get it. Hi in Dark Elf, oh, we're so nice, so pleasant, Dark Elf. Hi, we're slavers, raiders, coming here and there. That's why they're kind of falling under destruction, even though they still have cities and civilizations. They just mostly take. This doesn't mean the High Elves are just entirely perfect, or the Dark Elves aren't a little justified in the way they do things. They are still worshipping the Pantheon, the same one the High Elves came from. But namely, the god of murder Cain. Assassins, executioners, blood sacrifice and rituals, with dark magic being used. While the High Elves are arrogant in their own initial superiority, the Dark Elves are arrogant in that, in the belief that they can actually handle using chaos and dark magic, which they kinda can. Beast tamers, namely through just taking horrific monstrosities and poking them with enough spears and poisons to get them to do what they want. Slavers and raiders, the Dark Elves. They've also got just a Dark Elf Darth Vader. Whole thing burned, an armor he can't get out of. Supposedly the Chosen One-ish, the Witch King. I mean, look, they're over the top, everything in Warhammer's over the top, but man, the Dark Elves have a character called Malice Darkblade. It's so edgy. The last up on our little bit of destruction here, and no, I'm not gonna call them chaos, the Skaven. This faction is what caught my eye. These horrific Ratman, I love them. This faction, this right here, specifically the Doomwheel, this is what caught my eye. This is what led me into looking into Warhammer and Total War Warhammer. I fell in love with the Skaven first, and then I fell in love with the setting. Cause these horrible little Ratmen, these rat bastards if you would, actually breed like rats, have a massive under-empire stretching everywhere, a ruined city as their capital, multiple clans, backstabbing, all of them inbuilt untrustworthy. They will backstab you. It is coded into them. All led by their Grey Seers and their god, the Great Horned Rat. Crazy contraptions, using warp stones to power these things, all of them highly unstable and willing to blow up at any time, and a crazed plague cult to go alongside it to fill in the Black Death sort of angle. They're just awful and I love them. Also, they gave us Vermintide, that's fantastic. Now we move on to the spooky undead. Beginning with the Vampire Counts. I mean, with Vampire Count as the name, it's Count Dracula. It's gonna fill in all those tropes. Well, yes, there are the Von Karsteins, and specifically just kind of filling that, oh yes, off in Sylvania, in the corner, a backwater of the Empire. Other parts of the world as well, but the Vampire Counts, most of their stories take place in Sylvania, with multiple bloodlines looking over the undead, and all being this cursed people from an elixir taken from Nagash. With a corrupted or purposely changed version of his elixir of immortality, other mortals had taken of it to begin with, creating the different bloodlines. Now, these vampires aren't your way too far in generations thin bloods. No, these are the superpowered, always scary, hey, that looks like just a physical dainty woman. She will physically tear through plate armor. Magic, blood, curses, ghoul kings and blood knights, and all the necromancers and animated dead to go along with it alongside cursed beasts. It is the vampire counts who rule the night. Next on our undead list is a bit more Egyptian it's the Mummy. Hello, welcome to the Tomb Kings. Where they said, yes, again, 80s British lens, looking back at Egypt. Okay, we've got pyramids, we've got great tombs. Let's just go entirely in that direction, making this desert culture obsessed with death, namely after the great Setra, I'm not gonna list off all his titles, the Imperishable, who when he was dying, wanted to set up an order that would make sure he'd stay alive forever. One, extending his life, but not actually being able to finish the job. They protected his corpse and spirit, then buried it away in these magically enchanted tombs. This became a trend with other kings and just continued on until there's tons of pyramids and tombs everywhere, an entire culture based around death. Then you had Nagash coming from here, kind of upending all that, most of the general citizens just leaving skeletons around, but all those protections, leaving some very angry now Tomb Kings. Statues animated with souls, massive skeleton legions, and very ticked off mummies for being woken up. There's also, if you want to count it, because it's in some of the side stuff, Total War has it as a faction, but the Vampire Coast, led by Madman. And a few others. It's vampire counts, but ocean themed. Pirates, zombie pirates, with a massive, massive cannon. Also one of them set up in the Galleon's Graveyard, a magical, semi-other world, like whirlpool where everything from the ocean goes. All the ocean's dead traveling there, which is also the other end of the maw. And now we have Chaos. So, you might know the general big four from Warhammer 40k as well. Tzeentch, Khorne, Slaanesh, Nurgle. You've still got them, and we'll cover them individually, but in general, these Chaos gods wanting the destruction of everything and also really not agreeing and fighting each other, do most of their workings through their demons and their mortal champions. And the lowest on this totem pole of some of their champions and servants are the Beastmen. Human peoples and beasts that were drastically altered during the Cataclysm and then finally stabilized into this continuous form. They can have children. It's not just a one-off mutation, though they also join their ranks. The children of the forest, deep in the woods, minotaurs, gores, just satyr-esque figures, centaurs. But while most of Chaos just wants the end of civilization to lead to the end of the world, the Beastmen are more just accepting of the end of civilization. That's kind of the short-term goal they're going for. Burn that local village here, destroy that town over there, someone wandering into this part of the woods, kill them, but they are a bit more corrupting, bringing the taint of Chaos with them. Now, while there are many tribes up in the Chaos Wastes, which also lead into the Warriors of Chaos, before that, we have Norsca. They're left in a bit of an odd position. They're not really super close to the poles themselves, with an ocean dividing it. They're left in a bit of an odd position as a people and faction. You see, they're not actually super close to the gate itself. The Chaos Wastes don't entirely stretch into Norsca. They do a little and have less influence, namely because of that sea. But also they're not far south enough to be entirely outside of that influence, and also not entirely south enough to just be able to flee that influence, because there's another sea below, leaving them a bit more at the whims of those Chaos gods. And you do right to not ignore them, because living up there, they still have the chance of directly influencing you. Demons occasionally popping here, mutations striking you at a whim. If you don't appease the gods, you will be cursed. But in general, as a faction, they're a bit more monster hunters, the fantastical view of Vikings, horde helms, shirtless berserkers of the north, and a lot of the time the frontline bulwark of the Warriors of Chaos from further north. The Warriors of Chaos, made up of the various other tribes from the north, much closer to the gates, and much more into dealing with demons and the people that work with them. All of them on the path to ascension, going from that, again, shirtless barbarian of the far north to heavily clad in demonic cursed armor, blessed with mutations from their god, seeking to bring chaos down to the mortal realm and earn their path to demonhood, to demon princedom. Just pick a heavy metal album and just go up to the Chaos Waste looking over any battlefield of these guys. That's, yeah. Big spiky armor, mutations, giant barbarian men. On top of that, they have some siege equipment and other bits of artifacts here and there that they gather from the Chaos Dwarves, trading in that loot they take from other civilizations for massive and demon-enchanted bits of armor. Cannons that are kind of alive and shoot guts that are on fire with souls. Well, that's just the stuff they leave off to the side, some of the prototype stuff that's a bit dangerous. The Chaos Dwarves keep the best for themselves. A long while ago during the Cataclysm, far flung from the rest of the Dwarven Empire, they made a deal with something they found deep beneath the earth. Actually changing and mutating them, which shouldn't have been possible, actually allowing them to be able to use magic. They bind these demons into war machines, these horrific runes and weapons. They're also very small in number, and turn to stone when magic goes wrong. Enslavers, industrialists, and cursing entire landscapes with blood-cursed coal, because they're biding their time and slowly building up for ending the world. Though the big thing compared to all the other chaos powers, or the majority of them, they worship Hashut, a separate from the Big Four, which we're about to cover. Because with the Big Four, we have Tzeentch first, the grand architect of fate, the god of magic and change, and birds. He really likes birds. It's not, okay, he's not a fair thing, it's it. Tzeentch is everything and nothing. But if you want to be a powerful sorcerer, take magic and bend the world to your whims, and go from just a peasant to be able to rule over and break down a castle with a hand wave, that's Tzeentch. But every time you actually call out to him, that's the best case scenario, and likely one he's not going to find funny. What he's going to find funny is mutating you when you cry out. Next up is Nurgle, decay, desperation, and life out of control. Because while that may look horrific, and alongside that decay, disease is life. Things growing from death is life. Just pushing that cycle a bit further and keeping everyone there. Stagnation. Bloated carcasses, maggots filling his own soldiers and demons, and disease being his main weapon and blessing. The gifts of Papa Nurgle. And next we have the young prince or princess or she who thirsts Slaanesh, specifically excess. The one thing that kind of outpaces all of these, or not quite, it is not particularly just those kinds of desires, it's every desire. Everything brought to an extreme, including pain and suffering, and not just of other people, but of her own servants as well. Oh, the great Prince Slaanesh. He, she, it, wanting nothing but all from you. And lastly, the most obvious, bloodthirsty, big, red, and horned Khorne. Blood for the blood god and skulls for the skull throne. You have heard me say it a few times. The god of murder, warfare, hunting, slaughter, just kill things. Blood must flow, and Khorne cares not from where it flows. From his enemies, his servants, it doesn't matter. There's gonna be a lot of bloods and skulls within the naming scheme of everything here. It's almost as bad as the wolves from the Space Wolves. Ah, man, okay. There's also the various parts of the world that haven't been covered or haven't never been filled out. Ind, Koresh, Nippon, the Southlands, the interior of Naggaroth, the Warhammer, Spain and Italy-ish, the border princes holding off from the Badlands down south. All of those, and even more, are just kind of loosely covered or briefly referenced or mentioned here or there when it relates to a specific character. But we covered the big factions, both the games, some of the roleplay games have covered, but when it comes to the lore of Warhammer overall, and this entire setting and the world that you are just now discovering or just want another review of, it's a mess. It's a big mess. It's one of the oldest settings Games Workshop has, and it's split and its lore is very all over the place. Because you have the things in the current version of the war game, but then you also have to debate, is the old world separate from fantasy? How much does Sigmar reflect on this with the retroactive changes and revisions to past old world events? And everything from Black Library over the years. Not to mention the roleplay games, the board games, the video games. All of them, all of these, and the individual elements therein have slightly different takes on how everything plays out. Not just the events of the setting, but how some of these things work. How are your elves interpreted? How are they actually closer, farther from humans? How dangerous is magic? Is it very lethal? Is it not as lethal? Is it just a thing humans are scared of? When was a specific tech invented? How does magic actually function? Where'd it come from? All of these questions are a headache. But the short answer, general core things or whatever's in the book, that's like the center line of how everything's functioning. The rest of this timeline and further details, take your pick. It's headcanon, fan canon, which while that seems like a bad thing, I actually like. Kind of. Just because for the specific stories I'm looking to tell or even read, looking at some of these past books or interpretations of lore through a different lens, sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it breaks, but you can roughly smooth everything over to where it's one big old timeline and just big old universe and setting. And honestly, part of that's fun. Just actually putting these puzzle pieces together, having them click into place. But Warhammer Fantasy and the old world are just very much to 11. A planet twice the size of Earth, but same gravity and everything, but just more landmass to have more battles and bigger numbers. Massive mountains, ancient dead sky titans, magic corrupting everything in the landscape, wizards just exploding, and faith, steel, and gunpowder. Seeing this entire setting from that lens of, yeah, even the most powerful people, with a good shot from an assassin or just the right spellcaster, you're dead. Some of the roleplay systems as well reflecting how lethal everything is. But however you take this, whether you follow one specific timeline or set of lore and rules, or you just follow whatever's the modern thing, or have your pick and choose here and there, or specific fanons, run with it, talk with it, discuss it, have fun with it. whatever medium you desire it in. Because I really want Old World to do well. I really want to be able to see things like Koresh one day, or Ind, or just actually be able to have physical models of some of the Dragon Children from Cathay, or actual new updated minis for Old World. We've already gotten a few, and they're awesome. And while it has its dark elements and its dark humor, it's that. It's humorous, it's ridiculous, it's 11 in every category. You have elves living in just a magical wonderland, fantastic. All of them can interact with magic or basic cantrips, and fine high-powered mages looking at different winds of magic at the same time. To then a human dying in a ditch somewhere. Murder mouth meatballs, Aztec dinosaur men following old ones. Heavy metal albums just all coming down from the north to kill everyone. And all the little bits I couldn't mention, all the specific details here and there, some of those parts that were lost or interpreted or just kind of hanging on to the rest of the lore and the greater universe of all the different mediums. That Warhammer. I love that Warhammer. While 40K is great as well in all this and leaves a lot of free space with different planets and entire galaxy at its whims, when it comes to Warhammer in this one world, there are so many intricate details that you can have placed everywhere, and everything interacting with each other. It's not in a big vacuous galaxy that you're just waiting for a massive faction to shift and find one random named dirtball planet in the middle of nowhere. Here, it's over a specific country, over a specific city. A more grounded fantasy that is still over the top. It's not low fantasy, it is not. It is grounded. As in, like, you still have physics here and there, you still have black powder and some reliabilities, but it's just, why not? Give them dragons, give them mutations, give them dark gods wanting to destroy the world. Faith, steel, and gunpowder. Thank you for watching the video on Warhammer Fantasy, or the Old World, or I'm just gonna call it Warhammer Fantasy right now. Oh man, I've been meaning to get this out for a while. It's 3 months behind schedule. But I hoped you had a good time. It's been a while since we had an intro to the world of, and it's finally tackling one of the Warhammer settings I've been meaning to. And like the other intro to the worlds of, I'm hoping this opens the door to expand upon this, talk about some of these factions or characters in specific. Because this was a real breeze through, just really briefly summarizing some of these points. Also, Nagash, I just briefly referenced Nagash. He's such a big figure. I didn't mention any of the other Everchosen. Oh, it's a whole mess of things. But here's to hoping in the future that you like this video, you share, you like it, you have fun with it, and you enjoy Warhammer Fantasy in the Old World with me. I am so excited to make some more videos on this. This is the final gateway. It's finally open. It's breached. I have a Patreon down in the description. Thank you for watching the video, and a thank you to my patrons, and have a nice day.